we've been in Hebrews 11, but not so much looking at Hebrews 11. We know that Hebrews 11 is, the chapter where it says, by faith, all these different people did stuff. And so it wasn't a matter of doing a study of Hebrews 11 and trying to zero in on the faith part of it, but trying to connect it together with the points that we were listing about knowing God's direction. I mean, every one of these people that did something by faith did it somehow by communicating with God in some way. So we've been looking at Hebrews 11. How did, Enoch and Abel and Noah and Moses or whoever, how did they connect with God in such a way that they knew his direction? Let's put it that way. And so we started off looking at Abel and Enoch and Noah. We spent 1 week with them. We spent last week with Abraham and Sarah. Don't really want to go back over everything we've done in the past, but trying to take each character and see where in our summary it might fall, if it does fall. Because I really want the summary that I sent out to everybody to be like a practical tool that when we are facing situations and circumstances, whatever it might be, and we're really wanting to know the Lord's direction, the summary, I think, can be very helpful to us, I think. And so applying it to these men and women of God, when we see how it connects into the summary, I think it encourages us to say, okay, that's starting to make sense. I can see that. So last week we talked about Abraham and Sarah. We said how Abraham was called, which ties into Romans 8:28-29, where calling is connected with purpose. We talked about his purpose, and we talked about the judgment. It says that Sarah judged God faithful. And when she judged God faithful by faith, then she was able to receive strength. So she made a judgment call, not so much about the situation. I mean, the situation was an impossible one. And it's when the angels say, is anything too hard for God? But she made a judgment about God. And I encourage all of us to kind of do a similar thing, in the sense that the things that God wants to do in our lives many times are circumvented by our lack of faith, not believing him. Instead of saying, you know what? Like Solomon said, there's not one word of all of his good promises that has ever failed, ever. And when I look at my own life, like I said last week or the week before, I can find things that I wished in the past were different. And they were times, I've got to say, where I would have thought, what is that about? Has has God lost my email address or what? But those things are very, very rare compared to the fact that I'm 63 years old, sitting here with you guys, and the goodness of God that he's poured into my life. It's so far, 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 far outweighs the negative things. It's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. So to get to a point, I could see Sarah looking at their journey that they took, how he protected her when Abraham was saying it was his sister, and all kinds of stuff. The story, Sarah is an amazing woman, and I can see her looking at the whole picture and saying, you know what? God has been so good. And I know I'm old and my husband's old, but he said it. He's faithful. If he said it, it's going to happen. And I love that, because it says that once she got to that point where she had the revelation, I know God. Not that I know his will, I know God, like we said 1 week. The quest and request is not to know God's will, but to know God. If you know God, you'll know his will. That's the way it works. While we're trying to get to know his will, he's calling us to himself to say, if you get to know me and spend time with me, then you'll know my will. So, talked about Sarah and Abraham last week, and we're just mainly taking it out of Hebrews 11 when it talks about when Abraham actually, God calls him to sacrifice Isaac. And, I mean, I don't know what the right word is. We can talk in religious terms, theological terms, doctrinal terms. We can go on and on and on, be Bible scholars, get into the Greek, get into the Hebrew, get into everything else. But to have a visitation from God, and all of us in here are parents, and get the word, I want you to go to Mount Moriah and sacrifice your son. But the point being, we talked about Jesus in the garden, that even for Jesus looking at the cross and the Father's plan and the whole thing, he's not questioning it. He's wondering, he knows all things are possible, and so therefore it is possible that this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not my will, thy will. I know, and that week when we talked about that, we said sometimes it's just hard to see the good in something. We just don't get it. We don't see it. Even Jesus, he's not questioning the Father like I ain't doing. He knows it's good, but he can't totally see it, if you know what I mean. And Abraham, he's looking at it, and I'm sure he doesn't get it. Although the writer of Hebrews says he kind of reasons it out. Now let me see. God told me that he's going to multiply from me, like the sands of the seashore, the stars of the heaven. He's told me about my offspring, and he said it's coming through this kid. And now he's asking me to sacrifice this kid. Well, only one thing makes sense, that he's going to resurrect him, which was a totally unheard of concept. But that was the only thing that was left for Abraham. And so he goes on his way. In other words, I don't believe that Abraham ever saw it as a good thing. Because how could you see it as a good thing? But he knew God said it. And therefore God's got a plan that I don't get. And I think that's the way that a lot of our direction happens a lot of time. We just get on with, being faithful and taking one step in front of the other one with God, like Enoch did, walking with God. And if we're really honest with ourselves and each other, we don't know where we're going. We don't know what's going to happen, really. But we just keep walking it out. And all the New Testament writers talk about that journey that we're on, We just keep walking it out. So today we're going to just read the next 3 verses. There's only 3 verses because there's only one verse each pertaining to Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. So in Hebrews 11, if somebody wants to read verses 20, 21, and 22, just 3 verses. It's one about Isaac, one about Jacob, one about Joseph.
By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, and worshipped, leaning on the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the departure of the children of Israel, gave instructions concerning his bones.
Now there's some similarities in there. Anybody catch anything right away, some of the similarities?
By faith.
Faith starts each verse by faith, that whatever follows it was done by faith.
No, they're all concerning future events.
Yep.
Things to come.
Mm-hmm. They're interesting the way they're tied together. You may have noticed, when they're dying. There's references in there to the blessing, if you would. We're not going to take a long time here because all I want to say are relatively simple kinds of things with these 3 verses. And I'll give you the references back to Genesis that the writer is referring to. We're not going to go back and read them all because it just would take too long. I'll just kind of paraphrase them along the way. Isaac, remember, is Abraham's son. And when God once again tells Abraham, no, your future is not, the future of what I promised you is not coming through Ishmael. It's coming through Isaac, who hadn't been born yet. And Abraham's cry to God was, that Ishmael would live. Now, if you remember, quick stories, if you remember, Abraham and Sarah figure out that the way God must want to bring the promise is through Hagar, the Egyptian maidservant. So Abraham goes into her and they have an Ishmael. It's called a work of the flesh.
Did Sarah figure it out or did they both figure it out?
It doesn't really, it was Sarah's idea, but she submitted it to Abraham. So depending on how you look at it, I see it as a we thing, a husband and a wife, that she had the idea because it made sense. That's the whole point. She's too old, he's too old. We got Hagar, young girl. She's fertile, she can have a baby. I can't. It's called the work of the flesh. It's when God tells us something and we decide, oh, this is what he must mean. We get it done in the natural, in the flesh. But the thing that's interesting about it is God is reminding Abraham, but this is a work of the flesh, and Abraham is saying, oh, that you might bless my works of the flesh. Now us 21st century Christians would be like, oh, God doesn't respond that way at all. God says to Abraham, the man of faith, basically in chapter 17, if it's in your heart, if that's really what you want me to do, is to bless that work of the flesh, I'll bless it. That blows our minds because we are so convinced it's the exact opposite. Oh, no, those are works of the flesh. God can't bless those. Well, we need to read the Bible, quite frankly. And Ishmael, remember, is the root of all the Arab nations. Now, if you look at them today, they're outrageous and out of order in so many ways, but they are very, very blessed people. Now, I want to say this. We need to remember the difference between the natural blessings and the spiritual ones. God says to Abraham, I will bless Ishmael. It's a natural blessing. I will, and he tells him what that means. But he says, the real blessing is on the promise that I gave you. I gave you a promise. Who hasn't been born yet. And that's where the real blessing is going to be. In other words, Abraham is the one who's looking for a blessing on the flesh. Isaac comes along, and it says in Hebrews 11 that he ends up blessing Jacob, he ends up blessing Jacob and Esau. He blesses both of them concerning things to come. Now, we don't have enough time here to go through the whole story of Jacob and Esau. We know that in Genesis 25, Esau basically sells his birthright to his brother. When you read the story, though, Esau says something that probably, I want to say this to you, Liz, that probably Simeon is still battling with a bit. When he's hungry, Esau, he speaks to his brother about wanting some food. Jacob says, yeah, no problem, just give me the birthright. And Esau makes this statement, I'm hungry. What good is the birthright anyway? It's yours. And I think that when people are in situations, Simeon's, Esau's, whatever, and we look at it as, are you kidding me? He sold his birthright. We're very quick to be judgmental. And I think that's what Hebrews 11 is warning us about, that Isaac looked at both of his kids. If you follow Jacob, the brother is a wreck. If you follow Esau, he's a wreck. But Hebrews 11 says Isaac blessed both of them concerning their futures. I find that very profound because we're more looking at the person, where they're at, what they've done, what they think, what they value, and then we kind of administer the blessing based on all of that. Isaac looks at his two sons that God's given him, that are his sons. And he's blessing both of them. But Esau is a wreck. He sold his birthright. Jacob came to you and he deceived you into the elder son's blessing. Remember Rebecca and Jacob, they put the animal fur on him so he thinks it's Esau to steal the blessing from his father Isaac. Jacob's the one who wrestles with the angel, trying to pry something from God that he will give when it's right. I told you, I will do this. I want it now. He ends up crippled. He tries to outsmart Laban, Laban outsmart. You go on and on. When you look at these two guys, Jacob and Esau, they're just like us, to be honest with you. Constantly negotiating, jockeying for position, the whole thing. And it says Isaac. And I want to bring this back to our summary. Because he knows God. Because he knows the will of God, the ways of God. The question becomes this: should or shouldn't Isaac bless both of them? And Isaac knows God, that God's blessings come upon us, not because we've been good kids, but because he wants to bless us. He's a good dad. It flows from him. He's the good one. He's the good God. The blessings flow. And I'll tell you what, if anybody needs a blessing, it's the one that's screwed up time and time again. We think in terms of, but I'm kind of reward. No. What we're doing is we're showing the grace and the goodness of God in blessing. And the person who's being blessed like an Esau, he knows he shouldn't be blessed. When he goes to his father and says, isn't there a blessing left for me? And his father blesses him. The story is a fantastic one. And for the writer of Hebrews to refer to that one thing that Isaac at the end, this is all the things they could have said. It says at the end of his life, he blesses both of his kids. And we say, they're losers. He says, yeah, and I bless them with a future. I really thank God that he didn't look at me and say, what a loser. That when I was in my most lost state, he blessed me in drawing me to himself, what the one true God is really about. Isaac, I think part of for Isaac, when you read it, it's a very, very short story of Isaac, but it talks about how the Philistines filled up all the wells of Abraham. Abraham dug all these wells. It has spiritual significance. When you're growing spiritually, you're digging wells. You're going deeper. You're living off the deep waters, so to speak. That's all handed over to Isaac. He's got tremendous heritage. It would be like being Smith Wigglesworth's son or something. It's like, oh my goodness, what a thing to tap into and drink off of. And he lets the enemy, the Philistines, fill them all up. And as they're all filled up, Isaac realizes that his inheritance has been all filled up. And he starts redigging the wells. And it would have been really easy for God to stop that. Say, no, you screwed up. You let the enemy fill up all those wells that your father dug. It's not like that at all. In fact, Isaac redigs all the wells, and then he digs his own new ones. I just see Isaac saying, I screwed up. And I'm the promise. I'm the son of promise here. And I screwed up. How am I going to look at my two boys and somehow deny a blessing when I, in my own life, did not get it right all the time?